Lords, I speak to Amendment 127, but before I do so, can I just say a word about the Noble Lord Sharp's Amendment 125. He and other Lords on that side of the House often accuse those on this side of the House of ignorance of business, but this amendment shows ignorance of what happens in industrial relations on the ground. Let me make 3 points. First, there is nothing in the law to prevent an employer and an individual employee agreeing an improvement to terms and conditions on an existing collective agreement, save in exceptional circumstances such as that illustrated by the case of Wilson and Palmer in the United Kingdom, where the employer offered to pay workers a higher rate of pay if they surrendered their union membership. And that principle would also apply to prevent the penalisation of workers on grounds of any other protected characteristic. But as a general principle, workers and employers can agree to improve on an existing collective agreement. Second point, but why would an individual employee agree to detrimental terms worse than an existing collective agreement? Lower wages, longer hours, less holidays, fewer breaks, worse terms and conditions. There can be no reason why a worker would wish to not to abide by the existing collective agreement. Employees need protection against bad employers who might otherwise exploit this proposed loophole by saying to an individual employee, I want you to opt out of the collective agreement, hence undermining it. Third and final point, collective agreements are not dictated by the trade unions, but they are agreed by an employer and usually by a vote of the employees. What we need is more negotiation and less litigation. Lords, with that, I turn to my amendment 127. This amendment is intended to provide my noble friend, the Minister and the Secretary of State, with a mechanism to promote and encourage collective bargaining on a sector-wide basis without prescribing in detail the model to be deployed. It is to be used when needed. It doesn't compel the government to put it into operation. Lords, I won't repeat the arguments I developed in committee over the course of 3 speeches about collective bargaining, but I think I may be permitted to summarise the gist of those arguments in 6 points. First, the Employment Rights Bill makes commendable reforms to the legal machinery to establish collective bargaining between trade unions and a single employer. But there is no mechanism in the bill or anywhere else for multi-employer collective agreements or sector-wide collective agreements. Secondly, sectoral collective bargaining was the norm for the United Kingdom from 1918 up until 1990. It established a coverage of over 80% of British workers between the years 1945 and the late 1980s. That percentage of workers covered by a collective agreement has now declined to 25%. And that means that 3/4 of our workforce were employed on take-it-or-leave-it terms without any possibility of negotiating anything better than that which the employer offers. Thirdly, 80% collective bargaining coverage, curiously or coincidentally, is the level now set for the 27 member states of the European Union after 2 decades during which the EU undermined sectoral collective bargaining. That policy was reversed in 2024 by means of a directive. And of course, collective bargaining is now advocated by the OECD since 2017, by the IMF, and of course by the ILO. Fourthly, Labour's Green Paper, New Deal for Working People, and the subsequent publication, Making Work Pay, implementing the New Deal for Working People, Labour's election manifesto and the King's speech all endorse the extension of collective bargaining. Fifthly, I come to the benefits of sectoral collective bargaining. I think these need spelling out again. There are, as I identify them, at least 8 particular benefits. First benefit, sectoral collective bargaining increases wages. And let's recall that the real value of wages has risen only 0.5% in the last 20 years. Secondly, the rise in wages increases demand in the economy, the demand for the goods and services produced by employers. Thirdly, collective bargaining contracts the differentials which have emerged, gender pay gap, ethnic minority pay gap, the disability pay gap, and so on. Fourthly, collective bargaining by increasing wages diminishes the need for state benefits by way of subsidy to low wages. And let's not forget that 31% of those in receipt of universal credit are actually in work, which gives an indication of the lowness of wages in this country. Fifth, the increase in wages, of course, increases the tax take by the government, which diminishes the need to find money elsewhere. Sixth, sectoral collective bargaining prevents employers undercutting each other on labour costs. Seventh, the other side of that coin, is that it encourages employers to compete on productivity, investment, efficiency and innovation. And eighth, and this is an important point, it achieves a form of democracy at work. It gives workers a say in the terms and conditions on which they work. But as I said, there were 6 points, and the sixth and final point is one of particular interest to me as a lawyer. And it is that the observation that the rule of law plays a part here. The rule of law, Lord Bingham's 8th principle, is that states must abide by the treaties which they have ratified. That principle has been endorsed in almost every speech I've heard my noble and learned friend Richard Hermer, KC, the Attorney General, give since his appointment to that office. Now, this is significant because International Labour Organization Convention 98 and Article 6, Sub-Article 2 of the European Social Charter 1961 impose the duty on ratifying states, which includes the United Kingdom, not just to permit collective bargaining, but to, quote, promote and encourage, unquote, collective bargaining. The Employment Rights Bill was the opportunity to promote and encourage collective bargaining at sectoral level, but the bill does nothing to do that in any sector of the economy. And I remind the House that, and I quoted this very short couple of sentences from the European Committee on Social Rights, who held that, quote, if the spontaneous development of collective bargaining is not sufficient, positive measures should be taken to facilitate and encourage the conclusion of collective agreements. Where only 30% of the total number of employees are covered by collective agreements, voluntary negotiations are not sufficiently promoted in practice, unquote. Now, the United Kingdom is now significantly below 30% of collective bargaining coverage. In many sectors, collective bargaining is not, to use the words of the committee, spontaneously developing. One only has to think of agriculture, food and parcel delivery, hospitality, social care, and so on. My Lords, I've not forgotten the adult social care negotiating body or the school support staff negotiating body, but for reasons I set out at length in committee and won't repeat again, those bodies do not constitute a collective bargaining and cannot be extended to other sectors. They are not collective bargaining, one, because the Act says they're not, two, the parties have no autonomy over the subject matter, membership or procedure, and thirdly, because the Minister can overwrite the agreement or non-agreement. I therefore urge my noble friend the Minister to accept the offer of this machinery, which the bill can keep in its back pocket until needed.